Sarah Martinez stepped out of the small grocery store, her shoulders heavy with exhaustion. The fluorescent lights had given her a headache, and the simple task of buying milk and bread felt like climbing a mountain. 3 months had passed since she returned from her last deployment, but the transition back to civilian life remained brutal. She wore faded jeans and an oversized hoodie, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. To anyone watching, she looked like just another tired woman trying to get through her day. The prescription bottle in her jacket pocket rattled softly as she walked, sleeping pills that barely worked anymore. The parking lot was nearly empty in the late afternoon sun. Sarah's beat-up Honda Civic sat alone near the back, right where she had parked it to avoid crowds. She had developed this habit since coming home, staying away from people, avoiding noise, seeking quiet corners where her mind could rest. As she approached her car, Sarah noticed 3 men leaning against a black SUV 2 spaces over. They looked out of place in this suburban shopping center. Their clothes were too expensive, their watches too shiny, and their eyes too alert. One of them was talking loudly on his phone about some business deal that had gone wrong. Sarah kept her head down and quickened her pace. Her instincts, honed by years of military training, whispered warnings, but she pushed them aside. She was tired of being paranoid, tired of seeing threats everywhere. Maybe they were just businessmen having a bad day. She fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking slightly. The simple act of unlocking her car door seemed to take forever. Behind her, she could hear the men's conversation growing quieter, which somehow felt more dangerous than their loud talking. "Excuse me, miss," a voice called out just as Sarah opened her car door. She turned to see one of the men approaching. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a fake smile that didn't reach his eyes. His 2 companions had moved closer, forming a loose triangle around her position. "I think you dropped this," the man said, holding up a $20 bill. Sarah knew she hadn't dropped any money. She had paid for her groceries with exact change, counting every dollar carefully from her small budget. This was a setup, and these men had chosen the wrong person on the wrong day. "That's not mine," she said quietly, sliding her hand into her jacket pocket where she kept her keys positioned between her fingers, an old habit that had served her well before. "Are you sure?" the man pressed, stepping closer. "Pretty girl like you shouldn't be so careless with her money." The other 2 men had moved to block her escape routes. One stood behind her car, the other near the driver's side. They thought they had cornered a helpless woman in an empty parking lot. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Sarah's training kicked in automatically. She assessed the situation in seconds. 3 men, all larger than her, positioned strategically, no witnesses, multiple escape routes blocked. Her exhaustion began to fade, replaced by a familiar cold focus that had kept her alive in combat zones around the world. "I need to go," she said, moving toward her car door. "Now hold on," the first man said, grabbing her wrist. "We're just being friendly. No need to rush off." The moment his hand touched her, Sarah's military instincts took complete control. The tired, vulnerable woman disappeared, replaced by someone far more dangerous. But she kept her expression neutral, her body language submissive. "Let them think they had the advantage for a few more seconds. Please let go of me," she said, her voice small and frightened. The men exchanged glances and smiled. They thought they had found an easy target, a lone woman too tired and scared to fight back. They had no way of knowing that Sarah Martinez was a decorated Navy SEAL commander who had led some of the most dangerous missions in recent military history. The man tightened his grip on her wrist, and Sarah noticed the bulge of a weapon under his jacket. This wasn't just robbery. These men were professionals, and they had targeted her specifically. The question was why. "Why don't you come with us for a little ride?" the man suggested, his fake friendliness dropping away to reveal something much darker underneath. Sarah nodded meekly, playing her part perfectly. She let them see what they expected to see, a frightened civilian woman with no way to defend herself. It was the last mistake they would ever make. As they moved to escort her toward their SUV, Sarah began planning her counterattack. She had been ambushed before, in places far more dangerous than a suburban parking lot. The difference was that her previous enemies had known who they were fighting. These men were about to learn why Sarah Martinez had earned her reputation as one of the most effective SEAL commanders in naval history. But first, she needed to understand what they wanted and who had sent them. The answers would come soon enough, along with the swift and brutal consequences of their terrible choice. Sarah allowed the men to guide her toward their black SUV, maintaining her frightened civilian act while her tactical mind processed every detail. The vehicle had government plates. Not official government, but the kind used by private contractors and black ops teams. These weren't random criminals looking for an easy target. "Get in the back," the leader ordered, opening the rear door. As Sarah moved toward the vehicle, she noticed the subtle earpieces each man wore, and the way they positioned themselves to maintain visual contact with all approaches. Military training, definitely. The question remained, whose military? She stumbled slightly as she approached the SUV, letting out a small cry of fear. The performance was flawless. Even her own team members had rarely seen through her deception skills. One of the men actually reached out to steady her, which gave Sarah the perfect opportunity to assess his equipment and training level. Professional gear, expensive weapons, but sloppy positioning. These men were good, but they weren't elite. They had training but lacked the razor-sharp instincts that came from real combat experience. Sarah had faced enemies like this before, dangerous enough to kill civilians, but not prepared for someone who had survived the worst battlefields in the world. "Please don't hurt me," she whispered as she climbed into the SUV. "I don't have much money, but you can have whatever I've got." The leader slid in beside her while his companions took the front seats. The SUV was equipped with privacy glass and additional armor plating. Definitely professional grade. Someone had invested serious money in this operation. "This isn't about money, Sarah," the leader said, using her name for the first time. Sarah's blood ran cold, but she kept her expression confused and terrified. They knew who she was, which meant this was a targeted operation. The exhausted woman act became even more important now. If they suspected her true capabilities, things would escalate quickly. "I don't understand," she said, her voice shaking convincingly. "Who are you? What do you want?" "We represent certain interested parties who would like to have a conversation with you," the man replied. "About your recent military service and some operations that went sideways." Now Sarah understood. This was about the mission in Syria 3 months ago. The one that had ended her active duty career and left her struggling with nightmares and guilt. Someone wanted answers, or more likely, someone wanted to silence her permanently. The SUV pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward the industrial district on the outskirts of town. Sarah memorized every turn, every landmark, while maintaining her terrified civilian facade. Her military training had taught her to use every available resource, and right now her greatest resource was their underestimation of her abilities. "I was just a supply clerk," she lied smoothly. "I don't know anything about operations. I just counted supplies and did paperwork." The men exchanged glances. They had done their homework, but clearly not well enough. Military records could be classified and manipulated, especially for special operations personnel. These contractors had obviously been given incomplete information about their target. "Come on, Sarah," the leader pressed. "We know you were involved in Operation Sandstorm. A lot of good people died because of intelligence failures on that mission. Our employers want to know what really happened." Sarah's jaw tightened involuntarily, but she covered it with a sob. Operation Sandstorm had indeed been a disaster, but not because of intelligence failures. It had been sabotaged from the inside, and Sarah had spent months investigating the betrayal before her medical discharge ended the inquiry. "I don't know anything about that," she insisted. "I was in the hospital for most of my last deployment. I had some kind of breakdown, post-traumatic stress or something. The doctors said I couldn't handle the pressure." It was a perfect cover story because it contained just enough truth to be believable. Sarah had indeed been treated for PTSD, though her breakdown had been carefully staged to provide cover for her investigation into the mission sabotage. The SUV turned into an abandoned warehouse district, exactly the kind of place where people disappeared without a trace. Sarah noted the lack of security cameras and the isolation from main roads. These men had chosen their location well, but they had no idea that Sarah had conducted operations in similar environments dozens of times. "Here's what's going to happen," the leader explained as they pulled up to a rusted warehouse. "You're going to tell us everything you know about the intelligence leak that compromised Sandstorm. Names, dates, contacts, everything. And if you cooperate, you might even survive this conversation." Sarah nodded frantically, playing up her terror while her tactical mind shifted into combat mode. The warehouse would provide multiple exit routes and improvised weapons. More importantly, It would mask the sounds of what was about to happen when she stopped pretending to be helpless. As they escorted her toward the building, Sarah noticed 2 more men waiting by the entrance. 5 total. All armed, all confident they were dealing with a broken ex-clerk with psychological problems. They had no idea they had just kidnapped the woman who had personally eliminated more enemy combatants than the rest of their team combined. The warehouse door closed behind them with an echoing clang, sealing their fate. Sarah Martinez, the vulnerable civilian, was about to disappear forever. In her place would emerge Commander Martinez, the SEAL team leader who had never lost a mission or left a teammate behind. The reckoning was about to begin. The warehouse interior was dimly lit by overhead lights that cast long shadows between stacks of abandoned equipment and rusted machinery. Sarah took in every detail as they marched her deeper into the building. Exit points, potential weapons, blind spots, and defensive positions. Her captors thought they were leading a helpless victim to an interrogation. They were actually walking into a carefully planned battlefield. "Sit down," the leader commanded, pointing to a metal chair positioned under one of the brighter lights. Sarah shuffled forward obediently, maintaining her frightened civilian act while noting the positions of all 5 men, 2 at the entrance, 1 by the far wall, and 2 flanking her position. Standard interrogation setup, but sloppy security. These contractors were competent but not exceptional. As she sat down, Sarah let her hands tremble visibly while secretly testing the chair's construction. Metal frame, welded joints, approximately 30 pounds. Perfect for her purposes when the time came. The handcuffs hanging from the leader's belt told her they planned to restrain her soon, which would actually work to her advantage. "Now then," the leader said, pulling up another chair to face her. "Let's start simple. What was your real job during Operation Sandstorm?" "I told you I was just supply support," Sarah replied, her voice quivering with manufactured fear. "I never even left the base camp. I was having panic attacks and couldn't handle being in the field." One of the men by the wall laughed. "Boss, this is pathetic. Look at her, she's about to cry. Are we sure this is the right person?" Sarah almost smiled at that. Let them think she was weak and broken. Every second they underestimated her was another second to gather intelligence and plan her escape. The comment about the right person confirmed these men were working from incomplete information. The intelligence says Sarah Martinez, former Navy personnel involved in Sandstorm. The leader replied, "This is her, but maybe our sources overestimated her importance." Sarah filed that information away. Someone had specifically targeted her, but they hadn't shared her full military record with these contractors. That suggested either compartmentalized information or a double agent who didn't want her true capabilities revealed. "Please," she whispered. "I don't know anything important. I can barely remember most of my service because of the medication they had me on. The doctor said my mind blocked out the traumatic parts." The leader leaned forward, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Sarah, we know there was a mole in the operation. Someone fed information to the enemy. That got 8 American soldiers killed. We think you know who it was." Now Sarah understood the real purpose of this kidnapping. Someone was trying to silence her permanently, because her investigation had gotten too close to the truth. The mole was still active, probably in a position of power, and they needed her dead before she could expose them. "I swear I don't know anything about a mole," she said, tears streaming down her face in a convincing display of terror. "I was just trying to do my job and get home safely." The leader stood up abruptly and gestured to one of his men. "Cuff her to the chair. If she won't talk willingly, we'll have to encourage her cooperation." This was the moment Sarah had been waiting for. As the contractor approached with handcuffs, she continued sobbing and pleading, playing her role perfectly until the last possible second. The man leaned down to secure her hands, bringing his weapon within easy reach. Sarah's transformation was instantaneous and devastating. The crying woman vanished as she erupted from the chair with lethal precision. Her elbow connected with the contractor's throat, crushing his windpipe before he could even cry out. In the same motion, she grabbed his pistol and used his falling body as a shield. The other 4 men were still processing what they had witnessed when Sarah's first shot dropped the guard by the wall. Her second and third shots forced the remaining men to dive for cover, their shouts of confusion echoing through the warehouse. "What the hell?" the leader started to say before Sarah's next shot shattered a light fixture above his head, showering him with sparks and glass. "Sarah Martinez, Commander. United States Navy SEALs, she announced in a voice that carried the authority of years commanding elite warriors. You made a serious mistake tonight. The surviving contractors were scrambling for better positions, finally understanding that their helpless victim was actually a trained killer. But understanding came too late. Sarah was already moving, using the warehouse's layout against them with the fluid precision of someone who had fought in environments like this dozens of times. She rolled behind a stack of machinery as automatic fire erupted from multiple positions. The panicked shooting told her everything she needed to know about her opponent's state of mind. They were scared, confused, and making mistakes that would cost them their lives. You want to know about Operation Sandstorm? Sarah called out as she flanked their positions. I'll tell you what really happened. We were betrayed by someone we trusted, and good soldiers died because of it. Another contractor fell as Sarah's bullet found its mark through the gap in his cover. 3 left, including the leader who was now shouting frantically into his radio for backup that wouldn't arrive in time. But here's what you didn't know, Sarah continued, moving like a ghost through the shadows. I spent months tracking down that traitor, and tonight you're going to tell me who sent you to silence me. The warehouse had become a hunting ground, and Commander Sarah Martinez was the apex predator. The men who had ambushed a vulnerable woman were about to learn why Navy SEALs were considered the most elite warriors in the world. The warehouse fell silent except for the sound of Sarah's controlled breathing and the distant hum of industrial ventilation. 2 contractors remained alive, their leader and one other, both pinned behind inadequate cover by a woman they had underestimated in the most fatal way possible. This is impossible, the leader whispered into his radio. The target is, she's not what we expected. Send immediate backup to the warehouse. Sarah smiled grimly as she moved through the shadows, each step calculated and silent. She had disabled the warehouse's main power switch minutes ago, leaving only emergency lighting that created a maze of darkness and dim pools of light. The environment now favored her completely. Your backup isn't coming, she called out, her voice seeming to come from multiple directions due to the warehouse's acoustics. I've been tracking your operation since you first approached me in the parking lot. Your communications are jammed and your extraction route is compromised. This was partially a bluff, but Sarah knew how to project authority and control even in desperate situations. The psychological warfare was just as important as the physical confrontation. Fear would make her enemies careless and desperate. Who are you? The leader shouted, his professional composure finally cracking completely. I already told you. Commander Sarah Martinez, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. What you call SEAL Team 6. Sarah's voice carried the weight of unquestioned authority. I've conducted operations in 12 countries, eliminated over 40 enemy combatants, and led teams through missions you couldn't imagine in your worst nightmares. The remaining contractor by the eastern wall made the mistake of breaking from cover to get a better angle. Sarah's shot ended his involvement in the conversation permanently. Now it was just her and the leader, one-on-one in a game he had never been trained to play. You want to live through this? Sarah asked, moving closer to his position. Then start talking. Who hired you to grab me? Who wants me dead? And why now, 3 months after my discharge? I don't know names, the leader called back, his voice tight with fear. We're contractors. We get assignments through cutouts and dead drops. All I know is someone high up in military intelligence wanted you brought in for questioning. Sarah processed this information while positioning herself for the final confrontation. Military intelligence narrowed the field considerably. Only a handful of people would have access to her real service record and the authority to hire private contractors for black operations. What were your specific orders? She demanded. Extract you, question you about Operation Sandstorm, and eliminate you if you posed a security risk. The admission came out in a rush, desperation making him talkative. We were told you were unstable, possibly compromised, and definitely dangerous to ongoing operations. Sarah felt a cold fury building in her chest. Someone was using her PTSD discharge as cover to have her murdered, which meant the investigation she had been forced to abandon was close to exposing the real traitor. The mole wasn't just still active, they were in a position to order assassination missions. Here's what's going to happen, Sarah announced, stepping into the light where the leader could see her. You're going to tell me everything you know about your employer. Contact methods, payment systems, previous assignments, everything. The contractor raised his weapon, but his hands were shaking with adrenaline and fear. Sarah stood completely motionless, her own pistol held in a perfect two-handed grip, aimed directly at his center mass. The difference in their composure was striking. He looked like a panicked amateur, while she displayed the calm confidence of someone who had never missed a shot that mattered. "You can try to shoot me," Sarah said conversationally, "but you should know that I qualified expert marksman with every weapon the Navy uses. My longest confirmed kill was 900 meters with a sniper rifle in Afghanistan. At this range with a pistol, I literally cannot miss." The contractor's weapon wavered as the full reality of his situation sank in. He was facing a woman who had spent years being trained to kill efficiently and without hesitation. All his advantages were gone: numbers, surprise, preparation, location. He was outmatched in every possible way. "Put the gun down," Sarah ordered.
"Kick it away from you."
"Then we'll have a conversation about who wants me dead and why." The weapon clattered across the concrete floor as the contractor surrendered. He slumped against the wall, defeated and terrified, finally understanding that he had tried to ambush one of the most dangerous people in the American military. "Smart choice," Sarah said, moving closer while keeping her weapon trained on him. "Now, let's discuss your employer. And remember, I've interrogated enemy agents who were trained to resist torture. You're just a contractor trying to stay alive. This will be much easier if you cooperate." The warehouse had become a tomb for his partners and a confession booth for him. Sarah Martinez, the broken veteran they thought they were kidnapping, had proven to be their worst nightmare. But this was only the beginning. She still needed to find out who had ordered her death and why they were so desperate to keep Operation Sandstorm's secrets buried. The real hunt was just beginning. 20 minutes later, Sarah had extracted everything useful from the surviving contractor. His name was Marcus Webb, former Army Rangers turned private security. He had been hired through a shell company called Blackwater Solutions, not the famous military contractor, but a deliberately similar name designed to confuse investigations. "The contact point is a secured email address," Webb explained, his voice hoarse from fear and defeat. "We get assignments, payment schedules, and target packages through encrypted messages. No direct contact, no phone calls, no meetings." Sarah had zip-tied his hands behind his back and positioned him where she could watch all entrances while they talked. Her military training had included extensive interrogation techniques, and Webb was proving surprisingly cooperative for someone who had planned to murder her an hour ago. "What did the target package say about me?" she asked, methodically searching the bodies of his dead teammates for additional intelligence. "Basic biographical information, military service record marked classified, current address, and routines. The psychological profile said you were suffering from severe PTSD, possibly suicidal, definitely unstable." Webb shook his head in bitter amazement. "They made you sound like a broken-down veteran who would be easy to handle." Sarah found what she was looking for in the team leader's jacket, a secure satellite, phone with recent call logs and message history. The encryption would take time to break, but the device itself was a significant intelligence coup. "How many other assignments has your team handled for this employer?" she continued. 6 in the past year. All military personnel, all supposedly compromised or unstable. We were told they were potential security risks who needed to be contained or eliminated." Webb's face was pale as the implications sank in. "God help me, I think we've been murdering whistleblowers and investigators." This was worse than Sarah had suspected. Someone in military intelligence wasn't just covering up Operation Sandstorm. They were running a systematic elimination program against anyone who might expose wider corruption. The mole wasn't just a traitor. They were a serial killer using government resources. "I need names, dates, locations of the other hits," Sarah demanded. "Every detail you can remember." Webb provided what information he could, painting a picture of a coordinated campaign to silence specific military personnel over the past year. The targets had all been presented as psychological casualties or potential defectors, but Sarah recognized the pattern. These were all people with access to sensitive information about recent operations. "There's something else," Webb added reluctantly. "We were told this was supposed to be the final cleanup operation. After you were eliminated, the whole program was supposed to shut down." Sarah felt ice in her veins. She wasn't just another target, she was the last loose end. Her investigation into Operation Sandstorm had gotten close enough to the truth that someone was willing to murder multiple people to keep it buried. The question was, what had she discovered that was worth killing for? Her secure phone buzzed with an incoming message. Sarah checked the display and froze. It was from her former commanding officer, Admiral Richardson, marked urgent and encrypted. Sarah, if you're reading this, you're in immediate danger. I just learned about unauthorized contractor operations targeting former team members. Do not trust anyone in official channels. Meet me at the old safe house location tomorrow at 600. Come armed and come alone. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Either Admiral Richardson was genuinely trying to help, or he was part of the conspiracy and this was the next phase of the trap. Sarah had learned long ago that in the intelligence world, paranoia was just another word for proper caution. Here's what's going to happen, she told Webb. You're going to send a message to your employer confirming that the mission was successful. Tell them I was eliminated and my body disposed of. Then you're going to disappear. New identity, new location, new life. Because if I find out you've contacted them again, I'll finish what we started here tonight. Webb nodded frantically. What about my team? Their families will ask questions. Tell them the truth that they tried to murder a Navy SEAL and lost. But leave out the part where you survived. Sarah's voice carried the cold finality of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions. Consider yourself lucky that I believe in giving people second chances. She cut his restraints and watched him stumble toward the exit, broken and terrified, but alive. Webb would keep his mouth shut. He understood that his survival depended on Sarah's continued goodwill, and she had demonstrated very clearly what happened to people who crossed her. Alone in the warehouse, surrounded by the bodies of men who had underestimated her, Sarah began planning her next moves. Admiral Richardson's message could be genuine help or another trap, but either way it was her only lead. The meeting would have to happen, but on her terms and with extensive precautions. More importantly, she now had evidence of a conspiracy that went far beyond Operation Sandstorm. Someone was using military intelligence resources to systematically eliminate whistleblowers and investigators. The scope of the corruption was staggering, and Sarah was apparently the last person alive who could expose it. The exhausted, vulnerable woman who had left the grocery store earlier that evening was gone forever. In her place stood Commander Sarah Martinez, and she had a war to fight. This time the enemy wasn't foreign terrorists or hostile nations. It was the corruption within her own government. But she had advantages her enemies didn't expect. They thought they had killed a broken veteran. Instead, they had awakened one of the most dangerous people the military had ever trained. The hunter had become the hunted, and Sarah Martinez never lost when the stakes were this high. Sarah arrived at the abandoned marina 2 hours before dawn, having spent the night conducting surveillance and preparing for what could be either a rescue or an ambush. The old safe house was a fishing cabin on Pier 7, a location she and Admiral Richardson had used for classified briefings during her active duty years. She positioned herself in an overwatch position with clear sight lines to all approaches, her sniper rifle assembled and ready. The satellite phone taken from the contractors had yielded valuable intelligence after she cracked its encryption. The conspiracy reached higher into military command than she had imagined, but Admiral Richardson's communications were notably absent from the compromised networks. At exactly 600 hours, a lone figure approached the cabin. Through her scope, Sarah confirmed it was indeed Admiral Richardson. Same confident stride, same careful attention to surroundings, same unconscious habit of checking his six every few steps. But she waited, watching for additional personnel or signs of deception. The Admiral entered the cabin alone and activated the agreed-upon signal. 3 quick flashes from a pen light visible through the eastern window. Sarah waited another 10 minutes before moving from her position, following protocols they had established years ago for exactly this type of clandestine meeting. "Commander Martinez," Richardson said as she entered the cabin, using her formal rank despite her medical discharge. "I wasn't entirely certain you were still alive until I received Webb's status report this morning." Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward her sidearm. "How do you know about Webb?" "Because I've been monitoring the contractor teams for the past 6 months, ever since I realized someone was systematically eliminating personnel connected to certain classified operations." Richardson's weathered face showed a mixture of relief and grim determination. "You're the first target who survived long enough to fight back." The Admiral produced a thick folder from his jacket and placed it on the dusty table between them. "This contains everything I've been able to piece together about the conspiracy. The mole you were investigating during Operation Sandstorm isn't just a traitor, he's a foreign asset who has infiltrated the highest levels of military intelligence. Sarah examined the documents while maintaining awareness of her surroundings. The evidence was damning: financial records, communication intercepts, operational reports that painted a picture of systematic betrayal, spanning multiple years and dozens of compromised missions. Deputy Director Marcus Holloway, Richardson continued. He's been feeding intelligence to a network of foreign contacts while simultaneously eliminating anyone who might expose him. Your investigation got too close to the truth, so he ordered your termination under the cover of your PTSD discharge. The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. Holloway had been her handler during the final months of active duty, the man who had approved her medical discharge and praised her service record. He had looked her in the eye and thanked her for her sacrifice while secretly planning her murder. "How many others?" she asked quietly. 17 confirmed dead, including most of your former team members. They were eliminated one by one over the past year. Car accidents, overdoses, suicides, training accidents. All carefully staged to look like the psychological casualties of war. Richardson's voice carried the weight of command responsibility for soldiers he couldn't save. "You were supposed to be the last." Sarah felt rage building in her chest, cold and controlled, but absolutely lethal. 17 of her fellow warriors, men and women who had served with honor and courage, murdered to protect a traitor's secrets. The contractors in the warehouse had been small players in a much larger game. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice carrying the tone of someone ready for war. "Holloway is scheduled to attend a classified briefing at the Pentagon tomorrow morning. High-security environment, multiple witnesses, perfect setting for a public exposure that he can't suppress or cover up." Richardson slid another document across the table. "I've arranged for you to have access to the briefing as a consulting expert on Middle Eastern operations." Sarah studied the access credentials and operational timeline. It was a sound plan but incredibly risky. If Holloway suspected a trap, he would have multiple options for escape or retaliation. More importantly, they would only get one chance. If the exposure failed, both she and Richardson would be eliminated as threats to national security. "There's one more thing," Richardson added. "Holloway has suspected for weeks that someone was investigating the contractor operations. He's accelerated his timeline for eliminating potential threats. If we don't stop him tomorrow, he'll disappear into deep cover and resurface somewhere beyond American jurisdiction." The stakes couldn't be higher. This wasn't just about justice for Operation Sandstorm or revenge for her murdered teammates. It was about preventing a foreign asset from escaping with decades of American military intelligence. The national security implications were staggering. "I'll need equipment, backup identities, and extraction protocols," Sarah said, falling back into the familiar rhythm of mission planning. "And Admiral, if this goes sideways, I want your word that you'll complete the mission even if I don't make it out." Richardson nodded grimly. "You have my word, Commander. One way or another, Holloway's treachery ends tomorrow." As they finalized the operational details, Sarah felt the familiar clarity that came before a critical mission. The exhausted, vulnerable woman from the grocery store was gone completely, replaced by the elite warrior who had never failed to complete an objective. Tomorrow, she would walk into the heart of American military power to confront a traitor who had murdered her friends and betrayed her country. But this time, Marcus Holloway would be facing Commander Sarah Martinez on equal terms, with full knowledge of who she really was. The ambush in the warehouse had been his last advantage. Now it was her turn to choose the battlefield. And Sarah Martinez had never lost when the odds were even. The final confrontation was less than 24 hours away, and this time there would be no escape for the enemy. Justice for 17 dead warriors was about to be served by the one who had survived to tell their story.